Thank you, Franco. Now let's open the floor for comments and questions. Yeah. Volunteer.
Okay.
Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you. So one channel that wasn't highlighted is an indirect channel from China to Latin America, which is the behavior of the global corporate sector involved in energy and mining. So it would be interesting to see how the behavior of these large corporates, BHP, Anglo American, Rio Tinto, evolves according to their cash flow and their perspectives for commodity prices and their shareholder pressures for divest assets and things like that. So to put an example, in Chile, investment in mining used to be around 3% of GDP. It went to 8% of GDP in 2013. Now it's back to 4% of GDP, with a changing government in the middle, by the way, as Felipe said. This is very lumpy. It is very non-linear, and in some way leads to a different channel of transmission, different from the traditional higher demand for exports, higher export volumes, high commodity prices, because it impacts directly domestic investment. So I would like to see if the presenters have any comments on that. Thank you.
Any other comment? Yes, please.
So, I'm from China. Although I've spent more time in the U.S. than I did in China. Anyway, so I'd just like to make a few comments. First of all, I think these presentations are really good, very deep in the content. So from my understanding, I think a few things probably will be helpful us all together thinking through issues. First of all, the growth rate. 6.5% vis-a-vis, say, 13% some years ago, or compared to the 10% average since 1979. Clearly, is not high. But 6.5% is very high by world standard. Now the question then it becomes where does and where will growth come from? So here I think there was one or two charts which were pretty telling. I think the source of the growth is changing. Is more towards from investment to consumption, and more from manufacturing to services sectors. Now, more doesn't mean to say China will not do investment anymore. On the contrary, China will have to still invest in a big way in order to achieve 6.5%. But I think more and more so, consumption be more important. Now already exceeding 50%. And the services sector already about 55%, close to even 60%. A few years ago when I was in China, I gave a speech. It was only 40 plus. Now it's 55 already. So what does this all mean? That I think it means that, somebody also mentioned a few things. First of all, I think investment, FDI could play a big role in Latin American economy. So that's one probably you can watch. Secondly, also, I think one needs to also explore whether there's any potential scope for the services sector. So there probably I think we should give more attention to. Now there are a few things I was thinking myself, half jokingly. Then what about, say, winery industry in Chile? Chinese really enjoy wine in a big way. So far they import a lot of wine from France, Italy, Spain, but I think they're starting. Paulo, they're starting to import wine from Chile. I think that's probably potentially big. And how about then tourism sector? China now say there are over 100 million number of people going overseas every year. Over 100 million persons going abroad overseas, mainly Europe, but also Asian countries, some to US, not too many yet. Then how about Latin America? Now, if I think we can open up that source of growth, it will be a huge, development. Financing, as I said, I think last presentation was very good. It's very invisible, but I think it's also very important. So on and on, I feel that the government, China, commits they will achieve, at least in their word, by 6.5% through 2020. I think, I'm quite confident. I was there with the Managing Director, Christine Lagarde, in March, and we met with all the leaders, very comfortable because they are really committed to reforms. They know exactly what problems they face, what challenges they have, now and also over the medium term, including overcapacity, as you know. But they are very committed in doing things. So therefore, quite confident that 6.5% they will be able to achieve. So therefore, you would sort of thinking through within that parameter, within 6.5%, what would you do? Then regarding the changing source of income, then how would you adjust? Thank you.
If there is no other comment, I will abuse from my position as a chairman to make a comment also. In the morning, we were talking about whether or not we are under a secular stagnation environment, or we think more about the biased view about how financial markets behaves. I remember many years ago, and one of the conundrum in history was the saving glut coming from China as an economy with a huge surplus in balance of payments. I wonder, looking forward, an economy that is still, I understand, is running still surplus, how is going to have an impact on this natural real interest rate in the world, in the sense that it has become more and more important, as currently now China is already the economy with the largest GDP in terms of PPP. So just to try to connect what we're talking in the morning with now how China, how the impact of China to the rest of the world and Latin America could have also an impact. And my second comment, also going to the forex exchange rate. It was amazing how last year in August, a devaluation of 3% put all the financial market under strong stress. So that's maybe one idea about how China has become so important in terms of the world economy. So I stop here as a commentator, then go back to my hat as a chairman. If there is no other comment or question, I will go back to the speakers starting in the way that they present. So, Alejandro, you have some additional comments.
So very quickly, I think Pablo made a very good point that I think obliges us to say how we think about the influence of commodity prices on growth in Latin America, because we go through these transmission channels very quickly, but I think the issue is, this has been a very positive income shock for the region, and then this windfall of export revenues fed into aggregate demand, and that led into the expansion of non-commodity sectors. So when you look at the supply side in Latin America, a significant part of this growth came from non-commodity sectors. So in that sense, understanding how now the negative income shock will affect investment in commodities and outside of commodities, I think it's a key to understanding how growth will perform going forward. I think Yang Hai's point, he made several points, but I think I would tend to reinforce two of them. One is a 6% growth on an economy that is much larger than 10 years ago. It's a significant positive trend for the world economy, and therefore, looking at how the base has changed, even if the economy slows down, it's still a significant opportunity in many, many sectors in Latin America, and I think Latin American countries have to think on how to tap into these new structure of the Chinese economy that will be evolving, but will be generating, I think, a lot of opportunities for Latin America as well. And I fully agree. The issue of devaluation in China, I mean, through its effect in global capital market, it's another global shock that might affect the region. Without, I mean, thinking of movements in the real exchange rate in China that do not generate turmoil in international capital markets, I think to the extent that this is a policy move towards sustaining a smooth transition in the Chinese economy, that should be positive, especially for, as I said, for South America. It should be negative for those countries that compete with Chinese manufacturing exports in the world.
Thank you, Alejandro. Now, please, Felipe.
I kind of take a positive view of, unless the hard landing, a China that grows at, let's say, 5.5% to 6%, and with a significant restructuring of internal demand, I think it's not going to be bad news on the overall. I think we can perfectly live with that, and I think it would be good in one important way for our economies. Unless you are a mono exporter, you are basically a single export country, like if you have only oil, let's say. If you can diversify a bit, and the incentives are set so that your agriculture sector, your manufacturing, and but mainly the agriculture and the agri-industry and foodstuffs in general, which will include fishing, I think though that would be a very interesting thing. I will mention a couple of statistics from Chile. I looked at, we basically, when you saw 26% of our exports are going to China, well, you can think that almost all of that is copper. It used to be that way. But now, commenting on one of the charts, that 10 years ago, 1% of our agricultural exports, agro foodstuffs, went to China. Now 15% go to China. So we've multiplied by 15 the share. And since we're exporting much more, then there is a transformation in what we're selling. It's not going to be, it's going to be gradual. It's not going to be, from one year to another. The exchange rate will help, And I will finish with just a very a personal comment, our colleague from China that touched on wine, Well, wine, I happen to be a wine producer. And I am trying to sell to China, We are deeply doing, and we're selling in China, but the Chinese are kind of, reluctant. We hope to encourage the Chinese to drink our wine. And in terms of foreign direct investment, I must also say we are for sale. So thank you.
Just a brief comment. I remember a Chilean professor that came to the Central Bank of Peru for our course during the 90s. He used to say something like, if the Chileans were able to sell one apple to a Chinese citizen per year, we will get $1.4 billion. Okay, and that's at that time that figure was amazing for him. So now it's wine. That is very interesting. Please, Mr. Cotini.
Yes. Well, if China rebalances, the rest of the world has to rebalance too. We don't have to forget about that. And the only way in which I can see a hard landing, which I think has a very low probability, is if China tried, pressured by the world or by itself, to rebalance too quickly. Because, in theory, moving from investment to consumption is what is needed, but if you move too quickly in terms of reducing investment, you don't get the hike in consumption, then you may be in trouble. But I don't think there is any risk looking at how much rebalancing has happened so far. I don't think we have to worry about that. Still, China has a lot of rebalancing to do. The point that I wanted to make was that it would leave a very bad taste in our mouth to conclude that, trade exposure is a bad thing, or that even exposure to commodities is per se a bad thing. Yes, it's better to diversify, but the key is the old truth that you have to save for a rainy day as the only way, while you are trying to build a reputation, which is what makes that most emerging markets are financially constrained. You have to, accumulate reserves when you can, and that's what countries like Chile, Peru, and others are doing. And I refer to the Chile of 15 years ago, not the Chile of 2015 that Felipe is so upset about. So, yeah. That multiplier that links vulnerability and exposure can be zero in theory. And in many cases, which is the case of Denmark and Sweden and Norway, is very close to zero. So they are very exposed, they are very open, yet you don't see them as vulnerable as our countries.
Okay, and now the last word for Franco.
Last word of the day. Just very quickly, apart from being responsible for research coverage of Chile, Peru, Paraguay, and South America, I'm also responsible for research coverage of Central America and the Caribbean for JP Morgan. We haven't really discussed all that much this sub-region, if you will. We tend to think in terms of the bigger players, but not the small ones. Let me tell you something. In the context of this discussion of commodities and the impact and this and that, there's a single country that is an issuer of sovereign debts in Central America and the Caribbean that is a net commodity exporter, and that's Trinidad and Tobago. Everyone else is a net commodity importer. So not surprisingly, these countries have actually had a tremendous run over the past few years. They've greatly benefited from being commodity importers to the point where, and Julio just left, but Peru is not the economy that is growing the fastest in Latin America and the Caribbean. It happens to be countries like Panama and the Dominican Republic, which are actually growing above potential right now, around 6% each one of them. Dominican Republic closer to 7% at the moment. So the point that I'm making is that Latin America and the Caribbean also includes those small players that are actually at the other end of the spectrum as primary beneficiaries of this new world order of sorts.
Okay, thank you, Franco. I want to thank all the speakers with an applause from the public, please. And just last phrase, in the lobby, the bus is waiting us a quarter before 8 for the go to the restaurant. Okay, so thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Adrián, por la invitación.
Sí, creo que sí, más práctico.
Seguimos aquí mañana, ¿no?
Sí, acá mismo. Sí, más práctico. Sí, déjalo.